Hello, everyone. That's all good, all good. So I had like 2 days to get nervous. In a previous session, I talked about using a breast pump, and I almost cried. So I think it will not get worse than the session before. All right, so let's start. So my name is Simone. I'm heading up the service design team at FutureGov. FutureGov is a company based in the UK, and we design public services for local government and sometimes central government and public sector organizations. The majority of our work is in the UK, but sometimes we get the pleasure to work outside the UK. So our Australian team obviously works in Australia. Sometimes we work in Europe, sometimes in the Middle East. And I'll tell you a little bit about like various projects we've worked on. So there will not be like one coherent project or anything like that. We get asked quite a bit whether we can support large organizations to think more like designers and to help them to do their work the way we do it. It's a really fun job, but in the end the question is, if we continue doing that, aren't we designing ourselves out of our jobs? And in the following few minutes, I'd like to give an answer to that. And so I'll talk a little bit about skills transfer and building capabilities. And so the first thing is, why do we do that? What are the skills you need to transfer, or do we need to transfer any? And if you decide to do that, how is the best way to do that? So the first thing is, which skills are good to transfer to people who are not designers? So there's a process, we all follow that, and there's lots of stuff we do along the design process. And probably all of us are familiar with bits. Many maybe are familiar with all of it, I don't know. I'm not equally good in all of these things we do as a designer. And if I think about which ones to transfer to others, probably not everyone is equally well equipped to learn all of these skills. And probably not everyone needs to know all of these skills because they're quite a lot. So I'd like to run you through and just tell you a little bit about my experience, what works and what's a bit difficult to share with others. So the discovery phase, when it's all about research, and we talk to our clients about doing research, they say, yes, we do research, of course. We do surveys, we do questionnaires, so we do that. And then most of the time, our job starts with explaining that probably the kind of research they do is not quite the same research that we do. So there's a difference in market research and design research. And once we explained that, most of the time, people get that they haven't done the research in a very good way. It's about building empathy, and market research doesn't really work for that. And so maybe if we think about building empathy, I heard something really nice from Carl. I don't know if he's still around. Yeah. So he's from New Zealand, and he said that in New Zealand, when people arrive at someone's door, they have a look outside whether the shoes are outside or not. And depending on that, they take off their shoes before entering the house, or they just go in. And so it feels like that the Kiwis have a tendency to be super empathetic. And so I wonder if everyone has that, or if it depends on the person, how much empathy they have, and how well you can transfer that to someone else. So when we do that, we try to get people outside their desks. And this is a picture I took. And I think this manager, he left the office to do some guerrilla research with people using public transport. And he wanted to explore the opportunities for the Internet of Things, specifically about talking bus stops. And he left his tie before he left. And I thought that probably naturally, before we taught him anything, he had a quite good instinct that maybe it's a good idea if he leaves his tie inside the office when he talks to people waiting at the bus stop. So I think he has a natural talent in that. And I'm not quite sure whether everyone has that. If it comes to define, probably you all received some briefs from your clients, and you had a look at the brief and you thought, hold on, this brief is utter crap, and probably we need to start all over again. And so in the define phase, what we try to do is we try to get our clients think a little bit more about who they're designing for, what the key essential bit is they want to design for. And I tried that on a project in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. We've been there to do like over 6 months a capability program with the central government. And I worked with 80 people, and they were split up in 10 groups. And all of these groups, they designed a moment of life, like the service around it. And this team, they worked around the running a business service. And so they did some research, and they come up with the how might we statement, which was how might we offer investors all government services required to run a business through a single online portal. Probably not the best how might we statement, so I think they could improve on that. If they had used this how might we statement, probably what they had done would be like not thinking about which services are required and why are they all required. Are they really essential for the people using these services? So they would have just taken everything and just put it online. So they would have missed a massive opportunity to redesign the actual service. So this one is not the best example, I guess. And there's another one from a different team. So this is a slide they created, and they've done some work around a service called Applying for a Scholarship to Study Abroad. What they've done is they've done some research, and they were super overwhelmed by all the insights they found. So they thought, well, let's just put all of them on a slide, and let's just work on the how might we statement about unifying a scholarship system in the UAE. And I think they made their jobs really, really difficult for themselves, because by doing that, I don't know if you ever tried that, like solving a really, really big problem and lots of different problems at a time. Most likely, the thing you come up with will not solve any of these problems. So they managed to narrow down, and in the end, they just focused on one subject, which was about informing people who want to study abroad. And the idea they came up with was that they got rid of all like professional advisors, and instead they created a peer-to-peer information system. Developing ideas with people who are not designers is one of my favorite things, and I think it's probably the most difficult thing as well. Another example from the work we've done in the UAE. So imagine a country where getting married is a really long and winded process. So before you get married, you have like serious negotiations with your future partner about a marriage contract. You have to get lots of different papers and hand them into lots of different entities, and they ask you for the same information all over again. And then, in the end, you have to do a health test. So imagine we would like to make this journey better, and it doesn't feel like a marriage anymore. So when we've done a brainstorming session with the team, what do you think? What did they come up with? A wedding robot. So a machine where you put in all your paperwork, and in the end, there it is, the marriage certificate. So probably not the most romantic idea. In this case, I was lucky enough that some of the women in the team, they had like the same gut reaction that me, that probably is not the best idea. Maybe, we could think about maybe a divorce robot, fair enough, but a wedding robot was probably not the right thing. So, we have all the tools and we have all these techniques to come up with, ideas and be creative. But in the end, just that doesn't make an idea good, right? So there needs to be something else. And what we discovered, what works quite well in this scenario, is using design principles or design tenets. So for non-designers, if they have almost like a checklist, what they can evaluate their idea against, it can help to improve their ideas, because an idea itself doesn't, it's not good yet, right? There needs to be some quality to it. In the delivery phase, again, so we talk about prototyping. Our clients say, yes, we do prototyping. And then it turns out that actually what they do is piloting. So at the end of a process, they start creating a small service and scaling that. And they don't really think about what can be improved, because it's too late for improvements already. So when we explain the difference between piloting and prototyping, it's really easy, and they do get it really, really quickly. And they love prototyping. So some examples. This is a team creating a prototype for registering a new child on a mobile website. So paper prototyping. then this is a prototype of a clickable prototype, and it's a testing scenario. So the guy on the right, he works for Dorset County Council. He is part of the IT team, and he discovered that 30% of all the incoming calls to the IT team is about passwords and forgotten passwords. So what he did is he created this little tool in a prototyping tool, and he tested it so that people can do the password reset themselves. You can imagine the impact of a tiny thing like that. And then there's a prototype the UAE team did, like the getting married team. They decided in the end to focus on the health check. So maybe some background information. So the UAE, they live, I think, 9 million people, and 8 million of these people are immigrants, and only 1 million are Emiratis. And normally, if I would be an Emirati, probably I would get married to an Emirati man. And the government wants to make sure that we are informed about potential genetic risks when we have children. So they would ask us to do a health check before. Whatever the result is of this check, it's up to me and my husband, or my future husband, to decide whether we want to get married or not. So this health check is an awkward thing, right? And it gets even more awkward if you have to go to a health center to do that. So what this team tried to do is they tried to make this experience more wedding-like. So they decided, what if the doctor would come to my home and do the check with me and could inform me in a more private environment about potential risks and so on. So they created this 3-dimensional prototype, and they tested that with people who were supposed to get married. And so the feedback they received was that positive that they started doing a minimum viable service. So these are some impressions when the people came to your home to do the health check. And something quite nice was that in this scenario, the doctors, they are wearing the doctor outfit. And what happened was that all the neighbors got really worried because they saw a doctor rocking up in someone's house. And so the whole idea about the marriage wasn't that secret anymore, so everyone knew quite quickly. So this is prototyping. Prototyping, I think, works really well. Something which works a little bit less well in at least local government is the idea of agile delivery. So people do like it, and the picture here is this is all the documentation required when you want to deliver a project agile. So not quite it, I guess. So when we think about the whole process, it feels like that there are some stages in the process which are easier for us to support others to learn about it. I think in the discovery phase it works really well. I think everyone has the ability to do research, and then there's maybe a little bit that some people find it easier to build empathy than others. If it comes to the define, I think everyone can define a really good problem statement. Often the lack is less in the person themselves than in the organization. So sometimes the organization has KPIs, or they have high expectations of what they want to deliver, and then they just start to be, I don't know, over-motivated, and the problem statements become too big and impossible to solve. When we think about develop ideas, I think this is the most difficult capability to teach, because there's something about what makes an idea good or bad, and I tried so many times to explain what it is, but I can't really explain it. It feels like that there's something really implicit about it, right? And it's easier when people observe instead of when you talk about it. In the delivery phase, again, I think it works quite well. And often what's in the way of is the organization again. So even if people are up for prototyping and up for delivering agile, often the organization puts barriers that makes it really difficult. And so the people we work with in local government, to be honest, they are not the most... so I think they like their plans and they like to think ahead, and so for them it can be quite challenging not to know what's next. All right, so if these are the skills we can transfer, the question is, how do we do it? The answer is super easy. Give them a toolkit and templates, right? You've all tried that? Probably you realize that this is not a good idea. And so the reason why this is not a good idea is that service design is not a toolkit, it's a mindset. And there's a difference between learning implicitly and explicitly. So there's knowledge you can teach people explicitly, you can talk about it, you can give them in paper and they can read it and it's all good. And then there's knowledge which is implicit. And the only way to learn that is by observing others. And I think if you want to learn service design, make sure that you have like a service design buddy next to you and you can watch and observe. So what we try to do is we try to put less emphasis on toolkits and templates and that stuff, and we try to put more emphasis on making others think a bit more like a designer. And what that means, I don't know what it means for you. For me, it means that empathy is over data, curiosity is over knowledge, experimentation over planning, doing over thinking, instinct over certainty, and maybe even chaos over order. And so I tried to teach these things, and so I fucked up a few times. So the good thing is that I can tell you what I did wrong and how we can do it better. So the first thing is that for me it doesn't really work if you facilitate. So sometimes we think that, when we do workshops and stuff, we are the facilitators, and we're not supposed to have an opinion or ideas, and I think it's wrong. I think we should get involved and we should be part of it. We should do the work, because this is the only way that others can see the difference between good and bad. And so don't hold back when it's about brainstorming or coming up with ideas. Do chip in your ideas, because you are the designer. You are the ones with the good ideas. How should the others know what good is if you don't show it? Then, so Adam just told the story how FutureGov fucked up with an innovation lab. And so there's a risk if you set up innovation labs that you create innovation ghettos. So you have this little department in a big organization and you think that they are the only ones all of a sudden responsible for innovating. But what are the others? So are they supposed to think backward? So if you give the money and like the shiny tools to these kids, what are the others doing? So they are like maybe a little bit jealous, maybe even start to sabotage. So I think if we do innovation labs or innovation teams, we need to be really clever about it. And we need to start inviting everyone who's interested. And so the picture in the background is an example from 2 of my colleagues who've just been to Armenia to set up an innovation lab. So what they did instead was they set up a pop-up innovation lab, so something really transient, because it's not supposed to last, right? The more successful an innovation lab is, the sooner it closes down because it's not needed anymore, because innovation spread out through the whole organization. And so what they did here was that they, outside the location where it was placed, they asked everyone to chip in their ideas and their challenges so that the people could work on it together. Then don't only focus on frontline stuff. So in the UAE afterwards, I talked to one of the participants and she said that she feels like the right person in the wrong place. What she meant is that she had learned all these new skills and she started to think like a designer. However, her middle manager didn't. So normally when we are brought in by the CEO, right? Someone like senior leadership to work with frontline stuff. And then what happens sometimes, or what I forgot to do, is work with the middle managers. So we need to include these middle managers, because they are the ones who can make sure that people leave their work early. So if you don't tell them so if you bring in new skills and new actions, and the middle manager insists on quantitative research as well, then all of a sudden people have double the workload. So they are supposed to do the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. They get really frustrated. Sometimes even if the middle manager or the organization doesn't facilitate this new way of working, people leave with their new skills because they can't be bothered to work at that place anymore, right? So it happens that we do skills transfer programs, and in the end, the people leave the organization and apply at FutureGov. Don't be dogmatic, and sometimes it feels like we are a little bit. We have our ways of doing things, and we think that we are right. And sometimes we need to step back and we need to think more about the organization, what works there. So in the UAE, I thought that people would take part because they're intrinsically motivated, and that they want to learn new skills and put new skills on their CV. And this didn't really work. And at some point, as a joke, or maybe it was a gut feeling, I brought along these miniature awards. And all of a sudden, the motivation really changed. And I completely underestimated how competitive they are and how much they need recognition. And so these ridiculous awards they received there really kept them going. And I think some of them just participated because they could get one of these awards. So a few things to take away. So people will not become a designer in a day. And probably not everyone needs to become a designer in a day. So be aware of what you want to teach. Don't facilitate, do the work with the people you teach. Make sure that you bring in others. So please be open and invite others to take part. And don't forget these middle managers with their ties and stuff. Don't worry about too much about the toolkits. Care more about the mindsets. And so in case you're not needed anymore, it's a moment of success. Luckily, I have not been that successful yet. So are we running the risk of making ourselves redundant? Well, I don't think so, because I think there's always a space for us to be like the guardian of the quality. And I think there's always a role for us to role model what good looks like. And then there's another reason for it. So if we think about why we should do skills transfer, FutureGov includes skills transfer in any service design project. Whether we've been asked to do that or not, whether we get paid to do that or not, we just do it. And the reason for that is that our work is less likely to end up in the drawer. So if we start educating our clients, and if we start to give our clients a service design language, they are able to become our advocates. So they can talk to their stakeholders and make sure that stakeholders understand the work we've been doing. They can make sure that even if we leave, that the work gets continued and it doesn't stop there. If they have the language and if they have participated in the service design process, it means that the work itself has become better and they feel more ownership of it. So for us, skills transfer is a way to get better results and to have more impact with our work. Thank you.
Time for questions, and I bet there are a few. Adam will kindly throw the catch box to the lady in the front.
Hi. Hello. Yeah. Thanks for the talk. Really interesting. I'd like to know, how do you do that process of skill transfer? How that does happen with the client, and as well if you've had bad experiences with that. So learning the language doesn't mean understanding it. And then you get basically this service design language misused, like if you have that case.
So the way we do it is always that we work on real projects. So we never do projects which are not real because people don't care for it, people are not interested in the outcomes. So I think the key thing to start is to work on a real project everyone cares about. And then I think it's like the way we do it is about like being part of a team, doing it together, and giving the others the opportunity to observe what you're doing. So I think it's more about in the observing than in the like lesson-like workshop you do. Yeah.
And have you had a bad experience then misusing the language or any skills that you've transferred?
So it happened that clients afterwards said, you know what, I have an idea for a career change. I want to become a service designer. And I thought, well, I think you need to learn a little bit more before becoming a service designer. So I think that the only bad thing that could happen is that people maybe overestimate like how user-focused they are or how user-centered they are, and then it falls back to us. So this would mean that it's our fault because we haven't showed them enough the difference between good and bad. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Do I see more hands?
Thanks a lot for all the insights, really great. I'm curious about these innovation ghettos. We see all these labs popping up, especially here in Berlin. Maybe you can give a bit more tips or do's and don'ts in this area.
Well, I think there's one tip, I guess. So if you set up a lab, let the objective be to close it down as quickly as possible. Because if you manage that, it means that innovation has spread throughout the organization. It's not needed anymore. So if you build a lab, and the more you build it, the more you create a space, like a fixed, permanent space. I'm not quite sure if that gives the right. It should close down as quickly as possible.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
I think I do quite a similar job, and I always struggle at the beginning and at the end. At the beginning, when a company approaches you with a business challenge, how do they choose the team? I mean, you said you invite people, but how do you...
I think we work with different setups. So sometimes people get chosen, sometimes people get forced, sometimes we work with volunteers. I think if I had to form these teams, I would work with volunteers, like people who are up for it. But I think in the end it doesn't matter because there's not one way to motivate people. So in the example for the UAE thing, so if people get motivated because you tell them that if they don't run through that program and deliver successful work, they will have a bad time afterwards. If that's what they need, then well, maybe that's what they need. So I think we need to be more aware of what the organization is we work in, and depending on that, adjust. So if the organization says we want you to work with these people, even though the people are not really up for it, you need to adjust your program so it fits with their needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And also at the end, how do you hand over the results, in which form, to make sure that they're ready for maybe not implementation, but further testing, even though you're not part of the process anymore?
So I think when we hand over this stuff, I think we make it ready for implementation. Mm-hmm. So most of the time we end with a to-do list. So we start thinking about, okay, what if we implemented that? What would be the first steps we need to do? Sometimes we hand over a Trello board where we flesh out how people can continue. And I think this is the important bit. However you hand over, they need to be aware of how to continue the work.
Make it as actionable as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.